The morning sun slid gently through the kitchen window of the Whitmans' townhouse in Boston's Beacon Hill, casting soft gold across the tiled floor. Rachel Whitman stood barefoot by the counter, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, and tried to remember whether she had already fed Lily her breakfast. It was a small thing, almost laughable, but it was the third time this week she had asked herself the same question. Lily's bowl of oatmeal sat half-eaten on the table. Rachel stared at it, as if the answer might reveal itself in the swirl of milk and oats, but her mind offered nothing but static. She was 30 now, and life was supposed to feel steady. She had a husband, Daniel, a man from one of Boston's most established families. She had a daughter, 2 years old and bright as sunlight. They lived in a beautiful 3-story home not far from the Charles River, where the city's skyline looked like a promise. Everything should have felt secure. And yet, in the past few weeks, Rachel had started to wonder if something inside her was quietly unraveling. It began with small lapses. Her keys turning up in the refrigerator. Lily's baby monitor unplugged when Rachel swore she had left it on. The laundry detergent sitting in the pantry instead of the laundry room. Harmless mistakes, maybe, but there were too many of them. And then there was the stove. That day still made her heart tighten. She had come back from putting Lily down for her nap to find the kitchen thick with the smell of something burning. A pot on the back burner was smoking, the flame still high beneath it. Rachel remembered turning it off. She was sure she had, but when Daniel rushed in, his face pale, he only stared at her with a kind of cautious concern that cut deeper than any accusation. "You need to be more careful," he'd said quietly, lifting Lily into his arms as if Rachel herself might be a danger. After that, the fear took root. It followed her through the day like a shadow, whispering questions she couldn't answer. Was this normal exhaustion? The after effects of pregnancy, maybe? Postpartum fog that had lingered too long? Or was it something worse? Something she couldn't bring herself to name? One night, the unease sharpened into something stranger. Rachel had been folding laundry in the bedroom, the house silent except for the hum of the heater, when she heard it, a soft, lilting laugh. A woman's laugh. It drifted down the hallway, light and teasing, as though someone were standing just beyond the doorway. Rachel froze, listening. "Daniel!" she called, but there was no answer. She stepped into the hall, her pulse quickening. "Hello." The sound vanished as suddenly as it had come. When Daniel came home later, she told him about it, trying to sound casual. He chuckled and kissed her temple. "You probably imagined it. You've been tired." But Rachel knew she hadn't imagined it. The laugh had been too real, too close. And now, sometimes when she was alone, she thought she heard it again, a fleeting giggle in the next room, gone when she turned her head. She didn't tell anyone else. Not Hannah, her twin sister, who would worry herself sick. Not her co-workers at the law firm, where she hoped to return soon and maybe earn a promotion. The last thing Rachel needed was whispers about her mental state circulating through the office. So she kept it to herself. She forced smiles at the playground, double-checked the locks and switches before bed, wrote reminders on sticky notes she plastered around the house like a desperate breadcrumb trail. And still, there were moments when she stood in the kitchen or the nursery and felt as though reality itself was shifting beneath her feet. On that Saturday morning, as Lily giggled from her high chair and Daniel hummed absently over his phone, Rachel leaned against the counter and pressed her palms together, trying to steady her breath. Maybe this was just stress. Maybe she was overreacting. But deep down, a quiet dread had begun to coil in her chest, the sense that something was wrong, and not just with her memory. Something deeper, something she couldn't see yet. And as the light poured through the windows of the Whitman home, Rachel felt the first tremor of a fear she could not name. The fear that she was losing her grip on herself, or worse, that someone else was loosening it for her. For years earlier, Rachel Whitman had been a very different woman. Fresh out of law school, she'd landed a coveted junior associate position at a mid-sized firm in downtown Boston, a place where ambition hummed in the hallways and partners spoke in clipped tones about billable hours and precedent-setting cases. Rachel was eager, hungry to prove herself, and reckless in the way only people in their 20s could be. That recklessness is what led her into the affair. It had started innocently. Long nights reviewing contracts with her supervising attorney, late dinners that bled into confessions about dreams and disappointments. He was older, charismatic, and married, though he always spoke of his marriage as if it were already over. Rachel believed him, or perhaps she simply wanted to. The affair remained a secret until the day his wife found out and arrived at the firm in a storm of fury. Within a week, Rachel's employment was terminated by mutual agreement. She left the office carrying a single box of belongings and a shame so heavy it felt like an extra weight on her chest. The weeks that followed blurred together. Rachel stopped answering calls from friends. She stayed in her apartment for days, curtains drawn, meals forgotten. The ambition that once burned inside her was reduced to ash. She told herself she had ruined everything: her career, her reputation, her future. In the quiet of those long nights, she even told herself she deserved it. It was Hannah who refused to let her sink. Her twin sister had always been the steadier one, practical where Rachel was impulsive, grounded where Rachel chased ideals. Hannah showed up uninvited one afternoon, standing at Rachel's door with takeout and a look that allowed no argument. She sat her sister down and told her, gently but firmly, that this was not the end of her story. "One mistake," she said, "doesn't define your life. Not unless you let it." Hannah insisted Rachel see a therapist. She dragged her to morning walks along the Charles River, made her throw away the baggy clothes she'd been hiding in, and helped her pick out a new haircut that made her feel like herself again. Slowly, piece by piece, Rachel began to rebuild. She applied for new jobs, swallowed the sting of rejection, and learned to talk about the affair without flinching. The guilt didn't vanish, but it stopped being the thing that defined her. When she finally landed a new position at a smaller firm in Cambridge, she promised herself she would do everything differently this time. No shortcuts, no entanglements, no letting someone else's choices derail her own. For the first time in months, Rachel felt like she could breathe. It was there, in that second chance she had built from the wreckage of her past, that Daniel Whitman walked into her life. He wasn't a lawyer, but a client, the son of a prominent construction magnate looking for legal advice on a zoning issue. Rachel noticed him first as a presence. Confident but not arrogant, polite but distant, the kind of man used to being listened to. Their early conversations were all business, clipped and professional. Yet, something softened as the meetings went on. A lingering glance, a joke shared over coffee, a spark she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she wanted. Daniel asked her out months later, long after the case had concluded. Rachel hesitated at first. Her last relationship had cost her everything, and the idea of letting someone close again terrified her. But Daniel was patient. He invited her to dinner, and when she said no, he asked again, this time suggesting something casual, just a walk along the river. She said yes. The walk turned into dinner, dinner into weekend trips. Slowly, quietly, Rachel's heart thawed. The affair with her former boss faded into a scar, still visible, but no longer painful to touch. With Daniel, things felt different. Safe, steady, full of possibility. She could not have known then how complicated that possibility would become. But in those early days, standing beneath the autumn trees as leaves drifted into the Charles, Rachel believed she had finally outrun her past. And for a while, she truly had. The wedding had been a quiet, elegant affair on a crisp October afternoon. Just family and a handful of close friends gathered in a historic chapel on the outskirts of Boston. Rachel remembered every detail. The faint scent of lilies in the air, the way Daniel had looked at her as she walked down the aisle, the soft tremor in his voice when he said, "I do." For the first time in years, her life felt like it was moving forward again, toward something steady and good. Victoria and Richard Whitman welcomed her warmly into the family. They were formidable figures in Boston's business circles. Richard, the head of a decades-old construction company, and Victoria, his meticulous partner in both life and work. Yet with Rachel, they were surprisingly gentle. Victoria would stop by with homemade soup in the early days of the marriage, insisting Rachel eat more. Richard spoke to her not as an outsider, but as someone already part of the Whitman legacy. It reassured Rachel, who had always feared that her past might shadow her new life. Not long after the wedding, Rachel and Daniel began talking about starting a family. It didn't happen easily. Months passed, then a year, and each negative test carved a little deeper into Rachel's heart. Doctors told her that stress could be a factor, that treatments might help. And so began the appointments, the injections, the long mornings in waiting rooms under harsh fluorescent lights. Through it all, Daniel remained supportive, or at least he said the right words. But something in his demeanor felt distant, as if the subject of children belonged more to Rachel's world than his. When the second line finally appeared on the pregnancy test, Rachel cried. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, and now it was real. She ran to Daniel with the test clutched in her hand, her heart pounding with joy. He smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, "That's great news." It was exactly what one should say, and yet something about the flatness in his voice lodged itself in her chest. It wasn't indifference exactly, more like detachment, as though the news didn't quite belong to him. Pregnancy softened Rachel in ways she hadn't expected. She documented each flutter and kick, spoke to the growing life inside her belly as if Lily could already hear her. Daniel accompanied her to the first few doctor's appointments, but stopped making excuses for his absence by the third trimester. "Meetings," he would say, or "you'll text me the details, right?" Rachel told herself it was fine, that work was demanding and he would be more involved once the baby arrived. Lily came into the world on a rain-washed morning in early spring, her cries filling the delivery room like a promise. Rachel held her close, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. Daniel stood by the bed, looking down at his daughter with a polite smile, as if meeting the child of an acquaintance. He kissed Rachel's cheek and said, "She's beautiful." Then he stepped out to take a phone call. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and quiet joys. Rachel memorized the tiny curl of Lily's fingers, the rhythm of her breathing against Rachel's chest. Motherhood, for all its exhaustion, felt like stepping into the truest version of herself. And yet it was lonelier than she had imagined. Daniel rarely woke for midnight feedings. He held Lily for a few minutes here and there, then retreated to his study with a glass of scotch and his phone. Rachel told herself it was temporary, that some men took longer to bond, that the weight of fatherhood might simply be sinking in slowly. She clung to the belief that time would change things, that once Daniel saw their daughter smile, once he heard her first word, something inside him would awaken. Until then, Rachel carried the weight of motherhood alone, grateful for every moment with Lily, yet quietly yearning for the family she had imagined, the one she still believed might one day exist. It was a little past 2 a.m. when Rachel woke, disoriented and tangled in the sheets. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the city through the curtains, and the house was silent, too silent. It took her a moment to realize what had roused her. The space beside her was empty. Daniel's side of the bed was cold. At first, she thought he might be in the bathroom, but when the minutes stretched and he didn't return, she pushed the covers aside and slipped her feet into the slippers by the bed. The hallway creaked softly under her steps as she padded toward the faint light spilling from the study down the hall. That's when she heard it, his voice, low and intimate, the tone he hadn't used with her in years. "Of course, my beautiful," Daniel murmured. Rachel froze. The words hung in the air like smoke. "I love you too." Her pulse thundered in her ears. She edged closer, heart hammering, barely daring to breathe. "Everything is going according to plan," he continued, his voice calm, measured, the same voice he used in board meetings. She already thinks she's losing her mind. The plan is working. Rachel's breath caught. For a moment, the world tilted. Her first thought was Lily, asleep down the hall, oblivious to the words that had just detonated Rachel's reality. Then the rest of his sentence sank in, each word a blade. She already thinks she's losing her mind. It felt like the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Was he talking about her? He had to be. But what plan could he mean? And who is she, the woman he had just called beautiful? Rachel backed away from the door before she could hear more, retreating into the darkness of the hallway like a ghost. She returned to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling in her lap, the words circling her mind in a loop she couldn't break. I love you. Inheritance. She thinks she's losing her mind. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Maybe she had misheard. Maybe Daniel had been talking to a client or a family member or someone else entirely. People said things in jest or out of context, didn't they? But the softness in his voice, the intimacy, there was no mistaking that. It was the voice of a man speaking to a lover. And the way he'd said the plan is working felt too deliberate, too calculated to be anything but sinister. Rachel pressed her palms against her temples. Hadn't she been questioning her memory for weeks? Hadn't she already begun to doubt her grip on reality? The misplaced keys, the stove left on, the laughter she heard in the empty hallway, they had all convinced her something was wrong. And now, for the first time, another possibility crept in. What if none of it was an accident? What if someone wanted her to think she was losing her mind? The thought was too monstrous to hold on to. Daniel was her husband, the father of her child. They had shared a home, a bed, a life. Whatever flaws he had, the distance, the detachment, he wasn't capable of this. He couldn't be. Rachel lay back down, staring into the darkness as the minutes crawled by. Maybe she was imagining things. Exhaustion could do that. People heard things wrong all the time. And if she told anyone, Hannah, or even Daniel himself, what would she say? That she'd eavesdropped on a whisper through a closed door in the middle of the night? That she thought she heard him say something sinister? By the time dawn began to stain the sky pale pink, Rachel had convinced herself to say nothing. It was probably nothing. It had to be. And yet, as she lay beside Daniel when he returned to bed an hour later, his breathing deep and even, his arm brushing hers, she could not silence the echo of his words. She already thinks she's losing her mind. The plan is working. For the first time since she'd met him, Rachel felt something sharp and unfamiliar pierce through her trust, the faint, chilling edge of fear. The days that followed blurred into a strange, uneasy rhythm. On the surface, everything in the Whitman household remained the same. Lily's giggles filled the kitchen. Daniel left early for work and returned late, and Rachel went through the motions of daily life. But beneath that thin layer of normalcy, something darker was stirring, something that made Rachel question the ground beneath her feet. It started with the alarm clock. Rachel always set it for 6:30 a.m., just enough time to get Lily ready for daycare and herself prepared for the day. Yet, twice in 1 week, she woke in a panic to find the clock flashing 7:45. The alarm hadn't gone off. She was sure she'd set it. Daniel, still half asleep beside her, had only murmured, "Maybe you forgot." It was possible, she supposed. People forgot things, but she had never once forgotten that alarm. Then there were the misplaced objects. Her car keys in the bathroom cabinet, Lily's pacifier in the freezer, an unopened bill torn in half and stuffed behind the couch cushions. At first, Rachel chalked it up to exhaustion. Sleep deprivation could make anyone careless, but a pattern soon emerged. These strange occurrences only seemed to happen when Daniel was home. On the days he traveled for work, everything was where she left it. One afternoon, she opened her phone and felt her blood run cold. A call had been placed from her number to a woman she didn't know. Another time, she discovered a photo posted to her social media account that she had never taken. Daniel brushed it off with a laugh. You probably forgot. Or maybe Lily grabbed your phone, he teased, though Lily was far too young to manage such a thing. His casual explanations did nothing to calm her. If anything, they deepened the knot of dread in her chest. The moment that broke something inside her came on a Tuesday morning. Rachel had been folding laundry when Daniel's voice called from the kitchen, urgent and sharp. "Rachel, come here." She rushed downstairs to find him standing by the stove, holding Lily in his arms. A pot of water was boiling over, steam hissing angrily against the burner. "You left the stove on," he said, his tone measured but heavy with disappointment. Lily could have been hurt. Rachel stared at the stove, her heart racing. She was certain she hadn't used it that morning. She hadn't even been near the kitchen. "I didn't," she began, but Daniel only sighed and shook his head. "You've been forgetful lately," he said gently, like someone delivering bad news. "It's okay. It happens. But maybe we should talk to someone, a doctor, just to be safe." The words landed like a blow. Talk to someone. She knew what he meant. A therapist. A neurologist. Someone to confirm what she was beginning to fear. That something was deeply wrong with her mind. That night, she lay awake long after Daniel had fallen asleep, replaying the day over and over. Had she turned the stove on without realizing it? Had she placed that call? Posted that photo? Every certainty she'd once had about herself felt as though it was slipping through her fingers. But even as the doubts consumed her, a quiet voice in the back of her mind whispered what she could not yet admit. These incidents weren't random. They were happening too precisely, too deliberately, like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't yet see. Daniel, meanwhile, continued to play the part of the patient, concerned husband. He spoke softly about his worries for her, offered to schedule appointments, and reminded her that seeking help was nothing to be ashamed of. Rachel nodded along, but each word made her chest tighten. If he was right, if she was truly losing her grip, then she was a danger not just to herself, but to Lily. But if he was wrong, if her instincts were right, then something far more terrifying was happening in that house. And either way, the thought clawed at her as she drifted into uneasy sleep. She was no longer sure she could trust her own mind, or the man sleeping beside her. By the time Rachel finally called Hannah, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. They met that afternoon in a quiet cafe near the public garden, the kind of place they had once gone to gossip about work and talk about dreams. Now, Rachel stared into her untouched cup of tea and tried to steady her breath as she told her sister everything. Every strange incident, every misplaced object, every creeping doubt that had taken root in her mind. When she described the night, she overheard Daniel's conversation. The whispered, "I love you," the mention of inheritance, and the chilling words about her losing her mind. Hannah's expression hardened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't laugh or tell Rachel she was imagining things. When Rachel finally fell silent, Hannah reached across the table and took her hand. "Rach," she said quietly, "I don't think this is about you forgetting things. I think Daniel is trying to make you look unstable." Rachel blinked. Why would he do that? Hannah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Because if you're declared mentally unfit, he can take Lily. He can take control of everything, custody, property, any inheritance tied to her. And if he's talking about a plan, it sounds like this isn't spontaneous. He's building a case." The idea was so monstrous, Rachel wanted to reject it outright. Daniel was her husband. He might be distant, inattentive, even cold, but this? It felt too calculated, too cruel. And yet, the puzzle pieces slotted into place with disturbing ease. The alarm clock, the misplaced items, the stove, the phone calls, the voice in the night. "What do I do?" Rachel whispered. Hannah leaned in, her voice low and deliberate. "You stop relying on your memory and start relying on evidence. If he tells you to do something, like cook a certain meal, record it on your phone. If he says you forgot something, you'll have proof of what he actually said." Rachel nodded slowly. That made sense. Hard evidence couldn't be dismissed. And more importantly, Hannah continued, you need eyes on what's happening when you're not looking. Cameras, discreet ones placed around the house, living room, kitchen, nursery, anywhere he might try something. If you're imagining things, the footage will show that. But if you're not, her words trailed off. But the implication was clear. If Rachel wasn't imagining things, the footage would expose the truth, whatever it was. Rachel hesitated. The idea of installing cameras in her own home felt invasive, even paranoid. What if I'm wrong? She murmured. What if I really am losing it? Then the cameras will prove that too, Hannah said gently. But here's the thing, Rach. If you were truly losing your mind, would you be questioning it this way? Would you be this desperate to make sure you're not? Rachel stared down at her tea, cooling untouched between them. Hannah's logic was unshakable, and beneath the fear, a thin thread of resolve began to weave itself into something stronger. They talked for another hour, sketching out details, where to place the cameras, how to keep them hidden, how to back up the footage without Daniel knowing. Hannah promised to help install them and to check in regularly. Before they parted, she squeezed Rachel's hand again. You're not alone in this, she said, and you're not crazy. That night, after Lily was asleep and Daniel had retreated to his study, Rachel moved through the house with deliberate care. She tucked a small camera high on the bookshelf overlooking the kitchen. Another went behind a row of picture frames in the living room. A third, the smallest of all, nestled discreetly atop the nursery bookshelf. By the time she was done, her heart was pounding, her palms damp with sweat. It felt wrong, deceitful, even to surveil her own husband. But as she stood in the darkened hallway, listening to the faint hum of the baby monitor, she knew this was her only chance to know the truth. For weeks, Rachel had been living inside a fog of doubt. But now, for the first time, she felt a fragile sense of control returning. One way or another, the cameras would tell her if the nightmare unfolding around her was real, or if it was all in her head. The next morning began like any other, until Rachel walked into the kitchen. She stopped dead in the doorway, her breath catching in her chest. The floor was covered in shards of broken dishes. A trail of flour snaked across the tiles. A half-empty trash bag lay overturned, its contents scattered like debris after a storm. And on the windowsill, of all places, someone had carefully arranged a row of potato peels, their edges curling and brown. Rachel's stomach twisted. She had gone to bed with the kitchen spotless. She remembered wiping the counters, rinsing the sink, turning off the lights. Lily had been asleep. Daniel had been reading in his study. Nothing, absolutely nothing, had been out of place. Rach. Daniel's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway. Lily balanced casually on his hip. His expression was one of practiced concern. What happened in here? I don't know, she stammered. I didn't do this. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed, shifting Lily's weight in his arms. It's okay. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you just don't remember. The words sliced through her. Maybe you just don't remember. They were the same words he'd used about the alarm clock, about the stove, about the missing items. She shook her head, backing away from the mess as if distance might help her think. No, she whispered. I didn't do this. Daniel's tone softened, patronizing. It's nothing to be ashamed of. These things happen. Maybe we should talk to someone, just to rule things out. For peace of mind. Rachel barely heard him. Her pulse was roaring in her ears. Somewhere, beneath the swirl of panic and confusion, another feeling had begun to take shape, resolve. The cameras. She had almost forgotten about the cameras. Hours later, when Daniel left for the office and Lily was napping, Rachel sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, her hands trembling as she accessed the footage. The timestamp read 4:27 a.m., and there he was, Daniel, barefoot, in the same t-shirt he had been wearing the night before, moving silently through the darkened kitchen. Rachel's breath hitched as she watched. He opened the cabinet and pulled out a stack of plates, dropping them one by one onto the floor with deliberate precision. The crash of shattering porcelain was loud enough to wake anyone, but she hadn't stirred. Then he opened the trash bin, appended it across the tiles, and walked over to the counter, peeling potatoes with slow, methodical movements before placing the peels neatly on the windowsill. At 4:33 a.m., he reached into his pocket, took out his phone, and tapped the screen. A few seconds later, laughter, soft, female, and unmistakable, filled the room. He paused, head tilted as if listening, then slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked out, leaving the kitchen in chaos. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. She replayed the clip twice, 3 times, each viewing tightening the knot in her chest. There was no doubt, no room for misunderstanding. This wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't postpartum fog or stress or exhaustion. This was deliberate, calculated, cruel. And in that moment, the weight she had been carrying, the shame, the fear, the doubt, shattered like the plates on the floor. She wasn't losing her mind. She never had been. Her first call was to Hannah. "You need to come over," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "I have something you need to see." Hannah arrived within the hour. Together, they watched the footage in silence. When it ended, Hannah sat back, her face pale, but her eyes blazing. "This isn't just manipulation," she said finally. "This is abuse. Psychological abuse. And it's criminal." Rachel nodded, though the word criminal seemed too small for what she had just witnessed. It wasn't only her sanity Daniel was trying to dismantle. It was her credibility, her motherhood, her future. For weeks, she had lived inside a nightmare of her own doubts. Now the truth was laid bare in pixel and timestamp. The man she had trusted most was the one carefully building the illusion of her madness. And Rachel, for the first time in months, felt something like power stir inside her. The fog had lifted. The truth was hers, and she would not let it be buried. Rachel spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the footage in her mind. Every frame of Daniel's calculated sabotage burned behind her eyes. The broken plates, the staged mess, the laugh track played into the darkness. She barely slept. By morning, she knew what she had to do. Victoria Whitman answered the door herself when Rachel arrived at the family's stately brownstone in Back Bay. The older woman looked surprised to see her standing there with a tablet clutched tightly in her hands. "Rachel, darling," she said warmly, ushering her inside. "Is everything all right?" "Not really," Rachel replied, her voice thin and strained. "I need to talk to you. It's important." They sat in the parlor, Victoria with her usual poise, Rachel hunched on the edge of the sofa, hands trembling as she opened the video. She said nothing as the footage played, only watched Victoria's face pale with each passing second. When the recording ended, silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "My God!" Victoria whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "He did all of that." Rachel nodded, her throat tight. "I thought I was losing my mind. I thought something was wrong with me. But it was him all along." Victoria stood and began pacing, her usual composure unraveling. I can't believe he would go this far," she murmured. "Although maybe I can. Maybe this is my fault." Rachel frowned. "What do you mean?" Victoria sank back into her chair and stared out the window for a long moment before speaking. Daniel wasn't always like this. He was a difficult teenager, wild, reckless. He dropped out of college after his first year, blew through his trust fund on parties, drugs, women. Richard and I tried everything. Therapy, threats. Nothing worked. Finally, we told him if he didn't change, if he didn't clean up his life, we would cut him off completely. She gave a bitter laugh. And it worked, or so he thought. He straightened up, went back to school, joined the family business. We told ourselves he had grown up. Her eyes flicked back to the tablet, to the image frozen on the screen of Daniel scattering trash across the kitchen floor. But maybe he just learned how to hide who he really was. Rachel listened in silence, a hollow ache forming in her chest. It was strange. She had always seen Daniel's parents as distant but dignified, pillars of propriety. Now, watching Victoria's guilt crack her polished exterior, Rachel felt a flicker of something unexpected: pity. "There's something else you need to know," Victoria said after a long pause. "When Lily was born, Richard and I revised our estate plan. Everything, the company, the properties, the investments, is set to go to her when she comes of age. Not Daniel. Lily. We wanted to protect her future and yours. And we made one thing clear. If Daniel were ever to harm you, emotionally or otherwise, we would transfer even more to you, directly." Rachel stared at her. "He knows about this?" Victoria nodded. "He does. And I suspect that's exactly why he's doing this." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Daniel didn't just want Rachel gone. He wanted her discredited. If she were declared mentally unfit, unstable, delusional, he could fight for full custody of Lily. He could control the inheritance meant for his daughter without appearing to be the villain. "Rachel," Victoria said softly, her voice trembling, "I am so deeply sorry. We thought we were saving him. We thought we were shaping him into a man who could carry our legacy with pride. But we didn't fix him. We created this." Her words hung in the air like a confession. Rachel swallowed hard. The anger she expected to feel wasn't there. Only a deep, cold clarity. She finally understood the scope of what she was facing. This wasn't about a failing marriage or a man cheating on his wife. It was about control, power, legacy, and Daniel was willing to destroy her piece by piece to get it. Victoria reached for Rachel's hand, her eyes shining. "You are not alone in this. Whatever you decide to do, we will stand behind you. We owe you that much." Rachel nodded slowly. For the first time in weeks, the fog of doubt and fear lifted, replaced by something sharper: knowledge, purpose. The truth was out now, brutal and undeniable. And with it came the understanding that this fight was far bigger than she had imagined. The days that followed Rachel's conversation with Victoria were filled with a strange, sharpened clarity. For weeks, she had been stumbling through fog, doubting her own mind. Now, with the truth laid bare, she saw everything for what it was. And once you see a thing clearly, it's impossible to unsee it. Rachel began documenting everything. Every conversation with Daniel, every accusation he hurled, every manipulative turn of phrase. She recorded their interactions, took photos of the staged incidents, and saved screenshots of messages he sent. Hannah helped her compile it all into a meticulous file: timestamps, videos, transcripts, a fortress of evidence. And when Rachel reached out to a family law attorney recommended by one of Hannah's friends, the woman listened quietly before nodding. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "This isn't just manipulation. It's a premeditated attempt to undermine your mental fitness. Courts take that very seriously." Meanwhile, Daniel's behavior began to shift. The easy charm that had once cloaked his cruelty started to fray at the edges. He snapped at Rachel over trivial things: the way she folded Lily's clothes, the fact that dinner wasn't ready when he walked in the door. His tone sharpened, his patience thinned. And when his attempts to provoke her failed, his frustration grew. One evening, Rachel was upstairs putting Lily to bed when a sharp crash echoed from the living room. Heart pounding, she rushed down the stairs and stopped cold. Daniel was standing by the bookshelf, a small camera clutched in his fist. Its plastic casing was cracked, the lens dangling uselessly. "What the hell is this?" he roared, his face flushed with fury. "You're spying on me now? In my own house?" Rachel's heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she didn't back down. "I know what you've been doing, Daniel," she said quietly. "I know about the stove, the broken dishes, the laughter, all of it." For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes: surprise, maybe even fear, before it hardened into rage. You're delusional, he spat. You're losing it, and now you're fabricating stories to cover your own breakdown. I have proof, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Video proof. And I've spoken to a lawyer. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Daniel's jaw clenched. You think anyone will believe you? He hissed. You're unstable, Rachel. Everyone knows it. I'll make sure Lily stays with me where she's safe. Something in Rachel broke then, not from fear, but from a deep, simmering resolve. No, she said, her voice rising for the first time. You don't get to decide that anymore. Daniel's face twisted. You're nothing without me, he snapped. You have no job, no money. Do you really think you can take her and walk away? Rachel held his gaze. Watch me. That night, while Daniel was out pacing the yard and muttering into his phone, Rachel packed. She moved quietly but quickly. A suitcase of clothes, Lily's favorite stuffed rabbit, the folder of evidence she had compiled. When Lily stirred awake, Rachel whispered soothing words and wrapped her in a blanket. They slipped out of the house just after midnight, the cold Boston air biting at Rachel's cheeks. Hannah was waiting at the curb, her car idling under the dim streetlight. When Rachel climbed in, Lily still asleep against her shoulder, Hannah reached over and squeezed her hand. You're safe now, she murmured. Rachel looked back once as the house receded into the distance. The windows glowed faintly in the dark, a hollow shell of the life she had once dreamed of. But she felt no regret, only relief, only strength. For the first time in years, Rachel wasn't doubting her memory or questioning her sanity. She wasn't shrinking herself to fit into someone else's version of reality. She was taking back control for herself and for Lily. And as Hannah's car carried them toward the city, Rachel knew there was no turning back. Whatever came next, the legal battle, the confrontation, the storm that was surely ahead, she was ready for it. Because the woman who had once been afraid of losing everything had already lost enough. Now she was done being afraid. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and courtroom hearings. But through it all, Rachel felt a quiet, unshakable resolve she had never known before. For the first time in years, she wasn't second-guessing herself. She wasn't shrinking to fit into someone else's story. She was writing her own. With Hannah's help and her lawyer's guidance, Rachel filed for divorce and petitioned for full custody of Lily. Along with the petition, she submitted everything: the videos, the audio recordings, the screenshots, the detailed log of every manipulation and every attempt Daniel had made to undermine her. The evidence painted a damning picture, not of a woman losing her grip on reality, but of a calculated campaign to destroy her credibility and seize control. Daniel fought back, of course. He filed his own claims, accusing Rachel of instability and unfitness as a mother. But when the footage was played in court, the scene of him smashing plates, scattering trash, playing recordings of laughter in the dead of night, the room fell silent. Even Daniel's attorney shifted uncomfortably as the judge's eyes darkened with disapproval. In her ruling, the judge's words were clear and unequivocal. Rachel was not only mentally sound but had demonstrated extraordinary strength and composure under sustained psychological abuse. Daniel, on the other hand, had shown a deliberate pattern of coercive control and emotional manipulation. Custody of Lily was awarded solely to Rachel, with Daniel granted only limited, supervised visitation. The legal consequences didn't stop there. Victoria and Richard, horrified by the full extent of their son's actions, acted swiftly. They cut off his access to family funds, revoked his position at the family construction company, and released a formal statement disavowing his behavior. Privately, Victoria met Rachel after the final hearing and took her hands. "You saved Lily from growing up in a house built on lies," she said softly. "I failed my son once. I will not fail my granddaughter." Rachel didn't know how to respond. Forgiveness wasn't something she could offer easily, not yet. But there was solace in knowing Lily's future would no longer be defined by Daniel's choices. In the weeks that followed, Rachel found a small but charming house on a quiet, tree-lined street in Cambridge. It wasn't grand like the Whitmans' estate, but it was theirs. Every room was a blank page waiting to be filled with new memories. Lily's laughter echoed down the hallway as they unpacked boxes and painted walls in shades of soft green and pale yellow. For the first time in a long while, Rachel felt safe. The trauma didn't vanish overnight. There were moments when she woke in the dark, heart racing, half expecting to hear phantom laughter in the hallway. But then she would hear Lily's gentle breathing in the next room, and the fear would ebb away. Healing, she realized, wasn't a single event. It was a series of small choices to keep going, to rebuild, to believe in herself again. On a crisp afternoon in late October, Rachel and Lily sat together on a park bench beneath a canopy of amber leaves. Lily was chasing squirrels across the grass, her laughter bright against the rustle of autumn wind. Rachel watched her daughter and felt a peace she hadn't known in years settle over her. The weight that had pressed against her chest for so long was gone. She thought about everything that had happened, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the courtroom battles. And then she thought about what had come after, the strength she had discovered within herself, the life she was building for her daughter, the woman she had become through it all. A leaf drifted down and landed in her lap, its color a deep, fiery red. Rachel held it for a moment, smiling to herself. She had never been losing her mind. She had been losing the illusions that kept her bound, illusions about love, about loyalty, about who she was supposed to be. And in their place, she had found something far more powerful: truth, freedom, and a future that belonged entirely to her and Lily. The past, with all its shadows, was behind her now, and as Lily ran back to her with a smile wide as the sky, Rachel knew they were exactly where they were meant to be.